A First-Rate Madness by Nassir Ghaemi. Mental health issues don't get cast in the best light. Despite progress in recent years, a certain stigma still surrounds them. It means people who have experiences with psychiatric illnesses are often unwilling to speak out. That's unfortunate and, as far as Nassir Ghaemi is concerned, things don't have to be that way. His approach is plain. If we look to the past, we can see that many of the world's greatest leaders had mental health issues. If we accept and elevate that tendency, we can find a way to celebrate what can be the positive consequences of psychiatric illness. In the past, this taboo has meant that we preferred to support the representatives and leaders who seemed the most normal. But having depression or bipolar disorder, for example, may be an advantage when serving in office. As you'll see, some of the most impactful leaders in the world's history personally experienced mental health issues. By looking at these leaders' behavior, we can shed some light on the relationship between mental health and political leadership, challenging some of our deep-seated prejudices about this topic. Some mental illnesses may improve leadership abilities. Mental illness is serious. In its most extreme forms, it can be devastating for those who have it and their loved ones. Furthermore, a social taboo still surrounds mental illness. That may explain why some people experiencing mental illness are ashamed and try to hide it. However, the author believes that some forms of mental illness involve abilities that are otherwise inaccessible to the rest of the population. Specifically, the author has two mental illnesses in mind: major depressive disorder, commonly called depression, and bipolar disorder. They each foster important character traits. For instance, let's consider someone who's faced depression. Depression is a disorder that affects the mood and leads to feelings of sadness. It can also reduce motivation and interest in the world. However, it often means that someone who experiences it is more empathic than average, since he'll have experience and understanding of sadness. People who've not suffered from depression might be able to conceive of the experience of severe depression, but it's not the same as having been through it. And if you've managed to come through it, then you may have a better grasp of the struggles of the human experience. Bipolar disorder is somewhat different. People who have it may rapidly oscillate in their moods between mania and depression. It can make them more spontaneous. However, those high levels of energy and heightened moods are balanced with deep lows of depression. Also, and we'll return to these in later blinks, this means bipolar disorder personalities often look at things from non-standard perspectives. They are able to imagine creative solutions to problems that someone who hasn't experienced bipolar disorder would find hard to conceive. Both of these disorders also occur in milder forms. Dysthymic personality disorder is associated with depressive types, while hyperthymic personality disorder corresponds with bipolar disorder. People with dysthymic personalities lead their lives in a constant state of mild depression, which may culminate in several depressive episodes over the course of a lifetime. Dysthymic personalities are often empathic and deep thinkers. Hyperthymic personalities are often bursting with energy and creativity. They are charming and without fear. They are, essentially, in a constant state of mild mania. Now that we've gotten an overview of these disorders, let's look at some of the most influential leaders of recent decades with dysthymic and hyperthymic personalities. Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi struggled with depression, which conceivably led them to advocate nonviolent resistance. In all likelihood, few people would suspect that two leaders who inspired, and continue to inspire, hope in millions of people were depressive characters. The author, Ghaemi, believes Mahatma Gandhi was a dysthymic personality, while Martin Luther King Jr. experienced at least 3 episodes of severe depression. Both of these leaders initially suffered periods of depression in childhood, which set a trend into adulthood. As it happens, both King and Gandhi attempted suicide at young ages. When Gandhi was a teenager, he deliberately ate some poisonous seeds with a friend. His rationale was that he wasn't able to care properly for his elderly father. He felt guilty. As for King, he twice jumped out of a window when he was 12. King's friend, the psychiatrist Alvin Toussaint, explained this behavior as merely an impulsive reaction to the death of King's grandmother. However, the author is firmly of the belief that these were real suicide attempts. The author sees similar behavior patterns in these two leaders' later years. Apparently, depression was either triggered or exacerbated by the pressure in their lives. After all, both led rights movements that were faced with huge counter-reactions. When you think about it, then, these leaders probably felt great responsibility for their followers and were frustrated that obstacles seemed unsurpassable. Empathy can be observed as a neurological phenomenon. For example, when we see another person being abused, our brains react as though we were the ones on the receiving end of the abuse. It's known as the mirror neuron system and has been seen in experiments on macaques. As we saw in the last blink, depression strengthens empathy. A study of college students showed that depression lets people feel what others feel more intensely, even when they're not in a depressive episode. The author sees a link with King and Gandhi's politics here, interpreting their politics as a form of radical empathy. In other words, both leaders advocated for love and understanding. Opponents were not to be hated. The connection is clear for the author. These two leaders set about resolving conflict through nonviolent means, but it was an approach that drew upon non-normative worldviews shaped by mental illness. Churchill and JFK's struggles with mental health benefited the world, but mania in a leader can also lead to disaster. In 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stood before the House of Commons to make an announcement. He would travel to Germany to meet Hitler in an attempt to convince him of the unnecessariness of war. MPs jumped up and cheered at the plan. But Winston Churchill remained seated, despite others rebuking him for not joining in. Churchill had his reasons. In 1930, long before anyone else in British government came to the same conclusion, Churchill had recognized the Nazis' threat. They were a danger to world peace. In the author's professional opinion, Churchill likely had type 2 bipolar disorder. This resulted in several manic and depressive phases. Therefore, in the author's eyes, Churchill's depressive experience meant he was able to discern situations realistically. In comparison, his mentally healthy colleague's optimism was misplaced. The 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, is also an interesting figure. For the author, JFK exemplifies hyperthymic personality disorder. Simply put then, he was a hyperactive and creative risk-taker, with a sex drive to match. This was particularly in evidence during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev sent Russian nuclear missiles to Cuba to goad Kennedy into a preemptive strike with atomic weapons. But Kennedy held firm. He ignored the advice of everyone around him. By doing so, he averted nuclear disaster. Other leaders who might not have had Kennedy's experience with mental health struggles would probably have acted differently. No doubt they would have shared the natural impulse common among Kennedy's advisors and ordered a preemptive attack. Adolf Hitler is another world leader worth considering when thinking about mental health. The author is certain that Hitler had bipolar disorder. But what really caused the evils he leveled on the world was his vile ideology mixed with an over-reliance on methamphetamines. Certainly, Hitler suffered from bouts of mania and depression during his childhood. It's thanks to his friend August Kubizek that we know this. Hitler had always had an aggressively megalomaniacal streak, but it was as a leader capable of manipulating the masses that he found his feet. The author even argues that his demagoguery might have been facilitated by his personality disorder. It's also worth remembering that Hitler's aggressive and maniacal behavior went into overdrive from 1937 onward. That's when his doctor started prescribing him methamphetamines.